Hello everybody, it's me, GhostCritic, and I'm doing something a little bit different for this Monday video. It's still along the lines of having a look at some great comic books or some not so great comic books, as may happen. But there has been a lot of talk lately regarding diversity in comic books, and quite rightly so. When we all read our comic books, we want to have something to, or somebody to identify with, who seems to be going through the same struggles as we did, whether that is due to our gender, our sexuality, the colour of our skin, any number of scenarios. And like I said, you just want to feel like you can identify with those characters that you are reading on the printed page. Of course, it wasn't always that way. The kind of general census was that, you know, to be a hero, you were male, you were white. If you were a woman, you were incredibly sexualized. You were likely, if you were the girlfriend of a superhero, not long for this world. But things have got better as the years gone by. DC and Marvel are attempting to bring more diversity into their comic books, with varying degrees of success. But I think when we think about diversity in all those subjects that I've already mentioned, along with diversity in storytelling and genre, I think a lot of us would go to Image to find what we're looking for. However, as I was clearing out the other day and sorting out all my comic books, and you know, when you're putting all your back issues into the various boxes that you want to put them into, you kind of glance at certain comics as you're going through, and I just had the idea of, I wanted to show that Image weren't always the forward-thinking, diverse, politically correct kind of publishing house that we are used to it now, and that even they had their strange looks at what comic books were. I mean, it was great that back in 1992 we had this group of comic book creators, mostly, well, yeah, they were all from Marvel at the time, that weren't happy with the way that DC and Marvel were treating them just as kind of employees. So they created Image Comics. So we had Eric Larson, Rob Liefeld, Jim Valentino, Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, and Wiles Portico as the kind of main 7 guys that were that headed Image, with Chris Claremont coming in. I don't believe he was actually kind of like a shareholder. He didn't create one of the kind of separate studios that were part of Image, but he came along anyway. There was this kind of great kind of industry joke that this was going to be called the Exodus, given that so many of these comic book creators were coming from Marvel's hugely popular at the time X franchise. But you know, despite the still predominantly male feeling of this new publishing company, they did make huge strides in giving the creators back the power of, you know, the rights to their creations. And obviously the 2 main provisions of being part of Image was that, 1, the Image company wouldn't own any of the creators' work, and 2, that none of the Image partners would interfere either creatively or financially with any of the other partners' kind of works. So these kind of guys all kind of split off into their own studios under the big umbrella of Image. So you had Todd McFarlane's production company, you had Wildstorm Production, headed by Jim Lee. There was Highbrow Entertainment with Eric Larson, Shadowline, Jim Valentino, Top Cow with Mark Silvestri, and finally Rob Liefeld had the Extreme Studios. And there was this, it was very controversial at the time. For many years, decades, it was DC and Marvel, and that's what you got that were the two big kind of engines of comic book industry. And then Image came out and just blew apart that great two divide of Marvel and DC. They brought something new into the industry and kind of gave it a little bit of a lift for a while. I'm not saying it stayed steady at the original time of Image. They did kind of flood the market with good and not so good products, and what I've done is I've chosen a number of titles out of my own collection. There was probably a lot more, but just to show you that, you know, even though Image Comics is very forward thinking now, it's very diverse in all kind of minorities, etc., that kind of really wasn't at the very beginning. It was still a very male dominated, overly sexualized publishing company, and fair enough, they were still fighting those two big two, and that was what was wanted, I guess, at the time, or seemed to sell the most at least. So I hope you enjoy this little showcase of all the comic books I've put together, and I'm really interested to hear what you think about them. Let me know in the comment section below, and if you like the video by the end of it, give it a big thumbs up, and if you're new, subscribe as well. So here we go. Okay, so what I've done is I've picked from my collection issues of Image Comics from from their first 10 years or so of publishing at Image Comics, just to show you what Image used to look like. And you don't get more 90s than the beginning of Stormwatch. March 1993, created by Jim Lee and Brandon Choi, Scott Clark and Trevor Scott on pencils and inks, and this was just basically a good old-fashioned superhero team, only they were run by the United Nations, kind of like X Factor and their government-sanctioned superhero team of the time. Like I said, you can't get much more 90s than this cover. You've got your unseasonably large muscles, over-detailed costumes, and of course those gravity-defying breasts. Now, Stormwatch has seen many incarnations over the years. Most recently, we saw them at DC as part of their New 52 relaunch. Moving on to Butcher Knight. Butcher Knight, written by Charles Holland with Dwayne Turner. We're jumping on a bit here to December 2000. It only lasted 4 issues and was kind of a play, I guess, on Arthurian legend, part of the then Top Cow's Dark Crossing crossover, which included their other titles of Witchblade, Tomb Raider and The Darkness. Another kind of quintessential kind of late 90s, early 2000s cover where our lead female seems to have forgotten to put her clothes on, hence the rather sexy stockings and the lacy bra. On to Dark Realm issue number 1. This only lasted 4 issues. It was kind of a familiar trait of Image, certainly around the 2000s, where you had these titles popping up here and there. You never knew when the next one was coming out, and then they may only last maybe 4 or 5 issues. The premise of this story was that if you were born in 1977 and you were female, the likelihood was you found yourself disappearing without a trace. And then we had this kind of mysterious warrior that you see in the background, written by Eddie Yu with Taeson Chang, who was kind of famous for his Korean and Japanese art comics. I will be showing you a lot more of that kind of manga influenced storytelling and art in the next batch of comics, but that was certainly a theme of the time. Talking about books that really didn't last a great deal of time, you couldn't last any much longer than Skinner's, which had one issue and was never to be seen again. We have whoever this was feeling clearly a mighty bit cold. I don't know if you can see that, but she could do with putting some more clothes on. Moving on, this is Stone by Wiles Portacio. This was the second volume of this title. A lot of kind of, if anyone's ever read The Darkness, it's kind of that kind of inspired and original storytelling. Lots of demons, big male muscled protagonist. Nothing, you know, pushing clearly the story comic book telling boundaries. Moving on to a mini-series, Violator, back in May 1995. Violator was basically Spawn's arch nemesis and was hugely popular at the time. So he got his own mini-series where he clashed with, as you can see here, Violator versus Badrock. Badrock from the Youngbloods team, and also the Angel Celestine, all kind of fitted in with the whole Spawn universe. The surprise with this, despite the live field cover that you can clearly see, this was actually written by, of all people, Alan Moore. Moving on to the 10th. In particular, this is the Evil's Child 4-part mini-series, created, written and drawn by our big friend Tony Daniel, because we all love his Batman work, don't we? Primarily filled with the usual prepubescent looking women, unseasonably thin, and they always seem to have forgotten to put a decent amount of clothes on. A recurring thing with Image back in the 90s and early 2000s. Also by Tony Daniel. F5. This time he was writing more of a action-packed spy secret task force story. Only lasted 4 issues. You may recognise the title, if not the characters, because this eventually found a home, of all places, at Dark Horse. That's a bit surprising. You've certainly still got the kind of feel of Image being a kind of independent publishing company, and like to throw in that more kind of underground feel of comic books. And Creed, another title that had many incarnations with Image and had like lots of mini series, this particular one called Utopia, written by Trent Canigua. This is kind of like high fantasy, a high school kid who can basically bring to life fantastical landscapes. Great artwork inside, very stylized kind of artwork, but one of my favorite ones to look back at, and I've got a lot of fondness for Creed. Going in totally the completely different opposite direction, the original series of Hawaiian Dick. I believe they've brought out a new series of this. It's kind of a detective story with a supernatural feel. Think crime noir with tiki lounges and exotic girls, but again showcasing Image trying different things, very kind of covering lots of different genres, and sometimes doing it well, sometimes not so well. PvP, Player versus Player by Scott Kurtz, initially starting as a web strip. You can still find these online. It came to the comic books of physical paper, and it's really kind of like an irreverent look at pop culture, with a smattering of like satirical humour at geek culture. Never took itself too seriously, but very funny, very clever in what it put out. Very fun comic book from Image. Section 0 only lasted 3 issues, unfortunately, but was a kind of fun secret group that of the UN that kind of looked into uncanny, unusual, impossible scenarios. Basically, just kind of think X-Files, but a little bit more comic booky. You know, superheroes, strange creatures all teaming up to solve problems. But again, unfortunately, only lasted 3 issues. Big names certainly came over to Image to ply their storytelling trade. Most of them Warren Ellis with this City of Silence. Basically, he was doing his cyberpunk thing. Now, I was talking earlier about Image doing their kind of manga anime influenced publications, and here's just a few that I picked out. Heirs of Eternity, but really April 2003 should have been better, because I don't even know how to get into this. It was kind of this weird amalgamation of swords, magic, guns, but set in modern day. The quality of this was not good. It was sketchy at best, and that's me being kind. We've got Adrenaline, a weapon of war. Again, Tony Daniels. Who knew that he was so prolific in Image? This was a character that came out of the 10th. She's kind of like Black Widow, a kind of super spy, but the twist on this is that they kind of turn or mutate into these kind of half monster machine characters. Again, kind of pre-pubescent teenage girls showing off bits of skin and looking unreasonably thin. These girls have been cinched to the 9s. And we have from I think it was Dreamwave, that was what it was called, Dreamwave, which was again another offshoot later on of Image. This is September 2002. Kind of a mystical Scrolls meet weapon designers, mercenaries, with a little bit of political intrigue thrown into it. Again, short-lived series, only lasted 5 issues, but the kind of anime manga influences just from the cover alone is just glaringly obvious. Finally, for this kind of section of manga in anime influenced is Shidima. Again, more kind of magic and swordplay. 9 issues, did quite well, but that's only if you include the 0 issue and the 0.5 issue. Again, this was one of those titles that came out so sporadically, and at the time I didn't really have a pull list as such, and I just kind of picked these up from the shelves, so I didn't get all of this series, though if it had been on my pull list I probably would have. The last section I'm going to show you is my favourite Image comics. These are kind of, a lot of these are the big titles that you know about, and it didn't come more bigger than Todd McFarlane's Spore, and here we are with issue 1 back in May 1992. 260 plus issues and still going. This has been is this the longest ongoing title, I think, along with probably something like Savage Dragon. Sold over 1.7 million copies. Something that comic books can really only dream about now. Obviously written by Todd McFarlane. You've got so many big artists and creators on this, no more so than Greg Capullo, who spent a lot of time on this book. Another Warren Ellis, and a firm artist creator of mine, favourite, Ben Templesmith. It's Fell. Lasted 9 issues. It's kind of like Silent Hill, but with more of like a detective tale in it. Very grimy, very dark, which you can imagine from Warren Ellis and Ben Templesmith. Chris Claremont revitalised Gen 13. Lasted 17 issues, started in November 2001. It's basically kind of like an updated version of the X-Men, only these kind of group of teenagers were kind of granted extraordinary powers, but the comparisons are very, very similar to that kind of young X-Men that we've seen previously. And you must, you know, having Chris Claremont, one of the biggest X-Men writers that there has ever been, you're gonna get that feel from it anyway. It might be at Vertigo, DC's Vertigo now, but it started off at Image Comics. Astro City, Kurt Busiek, issue number 1 here. I've championed Astro City for many years. I'm so glad that Howler Mouse introduced me to this. Good old Tim giving me another book to search and hunt out for. But these are just great stories that combined, you know, the super heroics of the kind of golden age with the way that the civilians of Astro City saw and interacted with this kind of town full of superheroes and villains. Great book. If you've never seen Astro City, if you've never read any Astro City, you can dip in and out anywhere and you will have just the best time. This might be an issue further on down the line. It's issue 21 of The Authority, but it originally came out in May 1999 and was kind of like an offshoot of the Stormwatch series, where we had this group of superpowered individuals that basically had a zero tolerance to the threats that came about to the human race. So some very unmoral ways, unethical ways of dealing with danger to the human race. Begun by Warren Ellis, taken over by so many other creative teams to mention here, but very much of its time, where, you know, you'd had the Watchmen, you'd seen this darker side of superheroes, and that kind of followed on the trend with The Authority. Another book that came out of Spawn that I enjoyed a great deal, despite the fact that it was actually Mark Andreyko, who we won't talk about anymore, but Case Files Sam and Twitch. Sam and Twitch were basically detectives that kind of had an unusual relationship with Spawn, but this was basically a crime noir story, but so much darker in tone and the storylines that they played around with. Another of my favourite series that came out, and this was from Cliffhanger, which was part of Wildstorm, which was part of Image, was Out There. Out There was about these 4 kids that you see on the cover, who they find out their town that they live in is actually being run by demons. We've got Brian Augustine, who'd written The Flash and Justice League of America, coupled with Humberto Ramos. I know he's not everyone's flavour when it comes to art, but, you know, he's written Spider-Man, X-Men, Nova, but just a very cool title. Kind of lost its way towards the end, I will admit, but still a fun idea and concept. And back then, I just had a real fun ride with this, and, you know, that's what it was all about. J. Michael Straczynski's Rising Stars. What a title this was. Again, another one that was kind of plagued with controversy and solicitations. A lot of disputes between Straczynski when this was was about to be picked up to be made into a TV series, and I don't think Michael Straczynski was feeling very happy about the way everything was being dealt with, and then there was this huge hiatus between the first part and the ending of this series, which kind of, I guess, slowed everything down and kind of made the ending feel rushed. But the basic premise of Rising Stars was that we had this town of children who get powers from a passing comet, but it came with some side effects, and we have this killer going round murdering all these children, and what happens was when one of them died, their power, the kind of essence of power, got shared with the remaining the superheroes. Again, it kind of came from that time where it was the kind of the Watchmen era, where you were looking at characters from a very different perspective. This wasn't the kind of happy day glow, go in and sort something out and then come back out into the new one. These were a darker versions of superhero tropes, but seen from obviously a very more adult angle. Another great fun book was Telloffs, a kind of almost like kind of almost homage to kind of Wizard of Oz, where you had this child interacting with not only kind of like anthropomorphic characters, but they threw pirates in there and gods. There'd be like ninja frogs, we got wizards in there, all set in this mystical world. And it was just a great fun book. I love this series so much. No more so than Welcome to Tranquility. Gail Simone, our first female writer, finally. This is issue 2 of the first series, came out in 2007. This is kind of like the oldest book, and I just wanted to show you something written by a female writer. But great stuff, set in a kind of superhero retirement village, and all the dealings that happen within there. But great stuff, love this book. And finally, one of my favourite genres, so anytime I see something like this, and it started off so well, it's Warlands, that kind of Dungeons and Dragons good versus evil vibe. Just a great book, feeling very kind of anime manga-esque. It just threw everything in there. You had your big knights of old, you had magicians, you had dragons. They even threw vampiric kind of characters in here as well. It's split off into so many different tie-in, offshoot spin-offs, but the quality of those weren't living up to the original series. And that's it. I hope you had fun looking at my early Image titles. Let me know in the comments section below if you used to pick up any of these books. What were your favourites? What were those misfires of old? I look forward to seeing all your comments down below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.